Okay, I think I learned a lot today, and it's only 9:41. I want to just briefly highlight one of the comments that I heard, which resonates very strongly with me. Over the last 4 years, we've heard folks talk about how, oh, move to the cloud, it saves you money. Now, we hear that primarily because startups don't want to go invest in a lot of infrastructure, and so it does save them money when they get started. But when you look at the enterprise, it's not necessarily a cost saving. So it's really fascinating to hear that developers are getting the power to use cloud because it helps them move fast regardless of the cost. That's really fascinating. Okay, so we're going to move right on. Our next speaker is Rob Kraft. Rob's the Senior Director of Cloud Platform Strategy at Microsoft. I'm going to share with you a couple of comments or points on his bio. So first of all, he's responsible for driving Microsoft's view on how Microsoft gets their products to the cloud in a way that partners and customers can take advantage of. So that's what he's doing. In the past, he's been responsible for working with the top 200 ISVs. And he was also, for a couple years, the chief of staff for Microsoft in Paris. Oh, tough job. But I think he earned that when he graduated from the U.S. Military Academy with a degree in computer science. Oh, what you must know. Very interesting. Anyway, well, I look forward to your talk. Please welcome Rob Kraft.
Thanks, Dave. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, I'm not quite that bad. So thanks all for coming. I appreciate the invitation to come back. I had the opportunity to speak at the big data session that was ran through SVForum a few months ago. It was a ton of fun, and I didn't mess it up too badly. So I'm going to stick with the same 3 goals for this presentation I had for then, which is be bright, be brief, and then be gone, because I know we have a break just following me. So I'll be talking a little bit on a naysayer point of view, even though my job is to wear a lot of pom-poms and say the cloud is the best thing since sliced anything. I'll be talking a little bit about what we're seeing as friction points and try to give a little bit of data-grounded examples about what we're seeing. I spent a lot of time last night, I hope successfully, refiguring the presentation that you guys are about to see to use public data sources wherever I've listed a number. So rather than use internal data sets or talk about things that we have funded ourselves to figure out what customer behavior is that doesn't help you then carry the message forward inside of your own businesses. Hopefully this is stuff that you guys can utilize pretty actively yourselves and maybe start a conversation inside of your own company about how you disagree or how you have a differing viewpoint. So I will probably keep speaking even faster, so please cross your eyes if I speak too quickly. I know I do it, so apologies. Okay. So I like to start off with one of my most quotable people. You guys have probably heard of Larry. He's a local luminary. One of my favorite quotes, but don't worry, I make fun of everybody, not just Larry, although he's one of my faves. And then we see a contrasting quote slightly later by another outfit with a differing viewpoint. So you can look at this a little bit as the cloud wash writ large, or who's making money on selling cloud the most or being quoted the most. Larry, of course, now has cloud products galore, and Oracle is very firmly in the cloud business. So all fun to the side. I was probably in the 2008 window more towards Larry than towards the Montreal Gazette. But obviously, I've got some religion around this thing now, around what it's really doing at a very functional and powerful level, all the way from government down to university and even to primary school education. The cloud is really making a substantial difference. Let's see what those are. So it wouldn't be a good Microsoft deck if we didn't have something very powerfully marketing driven on the slide. So my apologies, but I wanted to define the namespace before we get too far down in the weeds, just because PaaS, infrastructure as a service, named to be coming soon, will be coming soon. But the 4 basic things that you have to have in order to have any claim to being a cloud or having cloud-like capabilities are the ones you see listed. Pooling of resources, in other words, common infrastructure access capabilities, understanding automation, et cetera. Self-service. So I'm very happy to see the previous speaker echo a lot of what you're going to see in this deck in a congruent way, but worded quite differently. So to show the viewpoints can differ, but the intent is very much the same in the marketplace. Thirdly, the elasticity. This is all around multi-tenancy. how do I not plan for maximum load, but just plan for capability and let the load take care of itself? And lastly, usage-based. So this is the all-powerful money conversation. So how do I know that I'm making a profit per user? Because one of my favorite one-liners to mention to an ISV working very hard to move to become a cloud player is, it's very easy in the cloud world to design a loss per user, and you can scale it as much as you want. So it's important that we understand the usage basis, and a lot of the primitives inside of cloud discussions we never had to worry about before. As a developer, I never had to care about the cost of network when I designed an application. I never had to care about the cost of a transaction in a database. Today, most certainly I do. So the idea that we have to change our understanding of some of the core primitives, then show up to the core business as these 3 points that the CEO will probably take forward and say, okay, we need to be very focused on making sure that we're making some money. That would be nice. We need to have agility, or the ability to change our minds if something isn't going the way we're wanting. In other words, you're going from a 2-month to a 2-day, or a 2-year to a 2-month. In the case of Focus, it's a question of, I don't want to care about disk I/O performance on VM4 cluster 3 rack 7. I want to care about my application's capabilities and what my customer experience is with my app, whether I'm an IT guy or whether I'm an end producer of the application itself. So that's just trying to name the core basics of how we think about cloud at Microsoft. And I just wanted to list off some of the major objections that we hear about. Certainly there's a litany. We saw a little bit more called out by James, and the order of these things changed a little bit. But my past couple of years, as noted, was the hard luck life of living in Paris for a little while, running 110 countries for Microsoft on the operations end of it. And you get different sets of objections when you're in Asia than if you're in mainland China, than if you're in continental Europe, than if you're in Eastern Europe or the US. The things that tend to be kind of commonly called out are security, compliance, compatibility, and the iteration worry. Depending on where you're at in the world, they differ, like I said. But the first thing which always comes up, my favorite country to make fun of is Germany. Make fun in the sense of they are very focused on security and privacy concerns. You can't begin the second sentence of a cloud pitch in Germany or a cloud discussion in Germany without having addressed beforehand their concerns around data security, data provenance, and data sovereignty inside of their country boundaries. So it's very important that we realize things are quite different outside of the US than they are inside of the US. I just want to call it out because in the Valley it tends to be a little bit like an echo chamber, just like it is up in Redmond sometimes. The reality from a customer point of view is very starkly, will I go to jail if I deploy this application sometimes? And some of our jobs is to make sure the CIO doesn't go to jail. The next part, speaking of jail, is compliance. I've got a slide a little bit later, hopefully not around jail. But the idea here is, how do I regulate, automate, and audit the compatibility and compliance of local mandates and foreign mandates in my application? It's a huge concern for a lot of companies. Right after that, then they say, well, what about follow-on applications? So my application's clean, I know how to do that, or it's an application that's on my own premises that I'm publishing pieces to the cloud, to the James' earlier comment about public data becoming available. How then do I ensure that when I integrate with my CRM system that I don't get dirty that way and PII isn't sent out onto the network in broad? So that's something that the industry needs to do a ton of work on, Microsoft included, is to get a lot of these templates and architecture patterns settled out. We're not there yet. That's certainly a barrier for a lot of people to adopt cloud today. And the last point I want to call out is a concern for a lot of companies that maybe aren't on bleeding edge, but maybe mid of the adoption curve companies, which is, I used to have to worry about my platform provider or my software provider iterating on their product every 2 years or 3 years, or I would have patch Tuesdays, alternate Tuesdays from Microsoft, or weekly from some other folks. And it seems like when I have 600 applications running my business, which is about the average for a large enterprise, about 600 core apps, I have to worry about the dependency tree and the testing patterns for these things, and it's driving me nuts. So when these guys move to the cloud, it's now change in my operation, not only from a change point of view, but a change away from my own control, and maybe they update the version without necessarily my control or my permission sometimes. So how do we control iteration and accountability when you go from right to left on this? Gets to be pretty interesting. So not only are the applications iterating, now I have to worry about compatibility across these iterations. I have to worry about the compliance of those iterations once they actually do 1 + 1 = 2 kind of effort. Hopefully the math still works. And at some point I have to make sure that it's not going to end up on a Twitter feed, all my internal customer order numbers. So that's kind of the left to right of how we think about some of the quantum objections. And I'll try to give a little bit more color about where the market is going, to James's point also, around where the puck is going. So I picked on the EU a little bit just because it's probably one of the most highlighted examples of where it's kind of hard to run a cross-border business just because the borders are closer together. So how many people saw the Wall Street Journal article, I think it was on Tuesday, that was talking about some strategy stuff coming out of Neelie Kroes' office around cloud strategy and adoption? I see a couple of nods and a couple of who. So Neelie is, I'm not on first name basis with her, Mrs. Kroes, is responsible for the strategy for innovation for the EU. And if that sounds like a tough job, it kind of is. So there's 27 member states in the EU that have to sign off on legislation that applies broadly. It's sometimes a serial thing. It goes door to door, and some countries will say, well, once Germany signs off, I'll sign off. If Germany signs off, maybe I won't. I want to see some considerations given for the way that I handle tax law, et cetera. But this tends to be the process that requires for legislation. A couple of numbers here that caught my eye. Anything with a T in it tends to be pretty shiny. $1.29 trillion in the next 8 years in cumulative GDP add due to cloud computing as an adoption curve. Now, the majority of that really is going to be virtualization plus. Some of that's going to be private cloud. Some of it's going to be hybrid clouds that sometimes live on-premises at a hoster and off-premises at a public cloud provider. And some of it's going to be a lot of what we think of as cloud today, which is cloud-native workloads running in a true scalable multi-tenant fashion. A lot of the way that we think about search or Twitter or the other guys that live in a true SaaS kind of fashion. It'll be a meld of all those things. But still, 1.29 trillion's not nothing. In this part of the century that we live in inside of Europe, it's a big deal to try to get that money as fast as they can. The other part, which is a really big driver for behavior on the EU's boundary, is jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. They're not talking thousands, hundreds of thousands. They're talking low millions of jobs being attached to the cloud data trend. I'll talk a little bit later about what that comes at the cost of, because as we know, ain't nothing in life for free. Some of these jobs will be coming as replacements for other jobs that no longer make sense. Like my initial interaction with the state of California from a government point of view. I was at Microsoft. This was after the bubble popped, so I was wearing blue jeans then as well. I came in and I was helping them understand how to do large-scale computing with something that had enormous computing capacity, 16 processors. It was this big ES7000 machine. And I had to go by the guy who owned all the IP addresses. So I had to get an IP address issued to the machine so I could do some load testing to show people how to write some scalable code. Well, it was a clipboard. His job, and for the last 18 years in the state of California, had been to man a clipboard that showed the currently existing open IP addresses because someone quit, their workstation IP address was available. They would scribble my name in, erase carefully the person's name that had the IP address before me, and that's how they would track IP utilization. And again, this is Department of Corrections, state of California, so if you worked there, I'm sorry, but it was true. It happened. And I just shook my head like, gee whiz, they should have a DNS server for this. And I would never want to actually have to think about that again, but when you visit, especially emerging market countries, a lot of them don't have common identity provider figures out. There's no Active Directory yet, or they don't have a common template for how they think about running core things at a government level. So how's that going to work in the supply chain around that government? So this is what I'm calling out is some of the change that the EU is going through, even though a majority of these are very well mature marketplaces. The one thing that drove me nuts, and I'll give my example when I bring up the four major holds. Let me just build this. I'll pick on number 2. So living in Europe, electronics are expensive. One of the things I tried to do was to order from our friends at Amazon a USB cable, because believe it or not, finding a USB cable in Paris is an adventure, especially if your French is as miserable as mine is, which is pretty bad. It turned out I ordered it from Amazon UK. It shipped to Amsterdam, went through a service provider in Germany for actual delivery, and the French post guy shows up and asks for cash for the import duty. If you don't have cash in hand to pay the postman, he has your package in hand, puts it back in his bag, and ships it back to the UK. So you need to have cash on hand for how to pay this thing. I would say it's not terribly streamlined as a supply chain, but the difficulty when it comes to the business rules for poor Amazon is who pays the VAT, what portions of the VAT land in what country, what regulation requirements are due for what duty, and what type of duty is defined in Amsterdam is different than the UK. They classify that one thing as an IT expense, which is a pretty low tax boundary, The other one they classify as a capital expense for infrastructure because it's wiring. So you're now buying wiring, which is a much higher tax classification. That is a very personal example of me and what ended up costing me 14 euro for a 3 euro cable that I ordered from Amazon. Well, I'd say they have some work to do. The last one I'll call out, and just to give a nod to what's happening in Europe is, it's kind of tough there right now. When you're at north of 25% unemployment in some of the major economies there, it's not necessarily easy to do innovation discussions without being booed out of the room, and they're still pushing on this. So huge credit for what they're trying to do over there. But this is a great example of what happens when the barriers come down between countries on a practical sense, but not on a legal sense. And we're seeing a lot of that in Asia as well as being a difficulty. In the United States, I think our most difficult challenge is what state do you pay sales tax on when you order something online? In California, welcome to paying sales tax on Amazon. I'll pick on them again. So we've had it in Washington State for a while. Sorry about that. So what I'd like to pivot a little bit towards is kind of what is the there. So those of you that read the title slide carefully, now I would suspect it's no one. I italicized there. So we're not there yet, which begs the question, where is there? So we have a certain set of IT standards today, normal expenditures of time, talent, and just plain capital. But how are those things going to shift? And the window I'm making the following 7 posits against is about 5 years. It's not 10 years, it's not 15. Some of these things are in flight already with early adopters, but I'm going to try to describe this as if I were a mid-market enterprise or a mid-market size company that's for profit, what is the environment in which I'm going to see cloud in the next 5 years? So I'm calling this big adjusts because I'll leave it to someone more clever than me on a clever thing to call it. No shocker here, but I just want to describe kind of what this means. We have a lot of mobile devices entering the marketplace, right? So we're going to have more devices than there are people. These devices will go from single core processing capability to 4 core processing capability if you don't have one already. They'll move quickly towards on-chip processing off CPU, so embedded device scenarios like your car. I think I saw yesterday Tesla just shipped their first over-the-air operating system update to their cars. You have to park it somewhere where you don't move it for 2 hours. I'm not making this up. You have to park your car, guarantee you have 2 hours for the data stream. It updates your operating system, and at the end of it, you have a choice on how you want the kilometers or miles to be displayed on your screen. That's the ad for you as a user. The ad for them on the backside is all their infrastructure got cleaned up and they're able to host a lot of things more efficiently. But that's the experience we're moving to. So, you know, when you go to the mechanic and you say it makes this rattling noise, he may say, try turning it off and on again, well, like the IT shops do. It's coming. Well, I worry about where the delete button would be on a car. Hopefully not inside of the front bumper. So one of the things that impacts here pretty quickly is we all should feel pretty uncomfortable if we're in a company that has customers, and hopefully we all do, about not being able to write clever things that pulls data from the 17, 18, 19 different systems that has all of our customer information and unites that in a front which gives us clear guidance, or my boss's clear guidance, towards what we should be doing instead of. In other words, it's not about what we're doing today. Really, BI has done a pretty good job about answering the question, what are we doing today? It's how we're going to get to the point of figuring out what we should be doing instead that a lot of the value and promise comes from. And one of the things that you'll see here is we're going to have about a gap of approximately 200,000 just in the US for people who know how to write those queries. And I'm not talking the hardcore tier 1 university data scientist point of view. That's absolutely a gap today. You guys are probably just twisting in the wind trying to find somebody who's awesome at that. This is assuming in the next 18 months, the BI providers do a good job about writing some of the core competency for the query engines. The UI becomes available instead of command line. And if you have a good statistical background, you could do smart things as long as you understand your business and the data as written. In other words, we're not talking core algorithm design. We're talking about what algorithm to apply where. So even with that bar being moved up, it's still 200,000 people we can't find, won't find, and are not in the pipe in our university system today. You're not going to get that skill set from your MBA program if you're currently in an MBA program. You just graduated. My MBA program had no idea what that was, data. And it was a Microsoft-only program. So we had no idea this even existed 7 or 8 years ago. The other part to call out is at the next tier, even up from there, what today we would think of as business analysts, the kind of people that think about what should we be doing instead and how. Those folks were looking at about 1.5 million shortage. So you could see it as a skills gap, you could see it as a training gap, but I don't even know where to go to get the training today myself if I wanted to go get smart at how to become business analyst year 2015. So that's part of what we're going to see the industry adapt to as well, and all the tooling associated around that stuff. But one of the things that you'll see this skill gap cause as well is an acceleration of people stop asking IT for help. Because IT ain't got no more idea on how to do it than you do. Trust me. They'll be making up just at the same speed as everyone else, and the only reason you go to them today is they're the people that know how to turn it off and on again. Pretty soon, you won't have a thing to turn off and on again. It'll be a series of machines in the cloud. So what I thought I'd do is carve out a little bit about the kinds of jobs and capabilities, let me just finish the build, that'll be up and the kinds of things that'll be down. And I promise I didn't crib off James, but a lot of this is really consistent to the viewpoint that his research is showing as well. Happily, it means that there's truth somewhere in the middle at least. One of the things is data analytics plus, especially short term, as more and more of these systems come online for the first time, there's room for a set of pioneers. And anyone know how you can tell a pioneer? They're the ones with arrows in their backs. So that's my favorite Cowboys and Indians joke. But the idea here is there are people who's going to be proving new art, new analytics capabilities, and new techniques. Hopefully those people like to publish papers because we all want to read those things. And then they're going to have jobs for life as they serve as elder statesmen in the business after 6 months. But data analytics is absolutely a huge investment area for a lot of companies. Data security, it's more the action of what do I need to do to have a team who has their arms around where my data lives in the world. So you can think of this a little bit as the cloud operations person that James is speaking about, and a little bit more broadly around security in general. So not only about physical security for my environment, how do I think about what it was required to actually delete data from which cloud provider. Some of them require 2 people, some of them require just an email, some of you have to send a notarized letter, believe it or not, in Europe. And then how do I think about data instantiation for this thing over time? So if I store my data in an online archive, what are my rights to get my data back within a 3-month period? Some of them have requirements that you have to maintain data there for a certain period of time, and you don't get access to your own data because you didn't license it. Isn't that a treat? So these things will mature over time. One of my favorites was our friends at SAP, when I was responsible for that relationship, had a viewpoint that any transaction in SAP was SAP's data versus our own data. And we've worked through that, as family does, but it typically was not necessarily a comfortable discussion when the first time you had it. The 2 areas I want to call it is more difficult. In procurement, becomes quite a different lifestyle. It's going to be calling cloud provider and negotiating margin on things or negotiating placement, or I want preferential CDN caching for my application out of Singapore because everybody watches my channel if I'm ESPN on mobiles instead of PCs. And all my traditional encoding and license cost doesn't make sense, so I want to do custom off. That's procurement. But the 2 big losers here are probably going to be anyone concerned with hardware support. This includes server. As more and more of the servers become genericized, you'll find you're going to have people pushing carts looking for red blinking lights rather than people pulling open cases and changing hard drives. If it's got a blinking light, we pull it, we chuck it, and it goes back to the vendor. We pull one clean, shove it in, and 10 minutes later, it's up and running the workload that the other one failed against. That is literally where we were at in our own data centers 3 years ago. We don't even have blinky light people anymore. We do it at a container level. So when a container has a certain percentage of bad, we just turn off the container. We spend some time fixing the container, and then we turn the container back on. And the container's 40 by 15 by 10, liquid cooled, and we're going to all air cooled later with custom hardware. So the definition of hardware shifts pretty quickly, and a lot of that thing we're using for our own infrastructure inside of the wire at Microsoft. So everyone here familiar with the term shadow IT? Oh, then everyone else not raising their hand currently is shadow IT. You're either admitting it or you're doing it. So shadow IT are these horrible people that write amazing things which they keep to themselves under their desk, and they give their boss amazing viewpoints on what's happening in the business or capabilities on what they should be doing instead. So you're all the people currently doing the data analytics yourselves, but it's just non-regulated through IT. You now have the capability in many of the early adoption cloud companies that say they have private cloud. They're using the private clouds first to test out clemency law. So they're saying, I will not make fun of your application. I will not take over your application, but please, please, please move it off that 4-year-old desktop underneath your desk and put it on the IT-provided virtual machine infrastructure, and we'll run it for free in perpetuity for you. As long as you say it needs 4 procs, 8 procs, 16 procs, whatever it is, we won't touch you with a cross charge, but we just want to maintain higher availability, and at least at the network layer, we know you're going to be secure. That's some of the early adoption that we're seeing, and Microsoft has that today. We're running our own shadow IT people with the light on them and saying, okay, we don't like it, but at least it's safer, and we'll worry about cleaning it up and aggregating it over time. So more and more of this will start to shift even inside of your own companies. How tempting would it be for you, as long as the virtual machine was really fast, it was local, and you didn't have to worry about cross charges, I'd run it too. That way I can use my desktop for my new shadow IT project. So the last one I want to call out is a loser, is software infrastructure architect. As much as it pains me to say architects may not be as heavily employed as they were since I used to be one, the reality is the person that defines the core patterns, the layering, the guy that worries about the IPsec routing from system A to system B, connects SAP up with your CRM system if they're disparate systems, that role really becomes less important over time as more and more patterns become available, more and more of the vendors write automation into connecting up these systems, and as more and more of the adapters become publicly managed by your public provider or your hybrid cloud provider. So as more and more of your own IT guys get out of the game, someone else is going to come with automation, and the people that used to do this for a living go do other things. So this is no surprise for most people in the room, but I've got a kind of a cool example on it for those of you that didn't see. I'll pick on Wall Street Journal again. A great example they carved out around one of the local Valley companies. You guys might have heard of the Facebook, I think. So what we're seeing first off that kind of lends power to the curve here is the amount of wattage required to do a fixed operation computation, like adding 2 numbers together, pulling a report, generating a slide, is halving pretty much every 18 months. So as die sizes get smaller, you get better utilization of wattage. The actual, believe it or not, versus the original Pentium, the current set of Intel processors are 3 times as effective per clock tip at computation. Factor all that in, and you end up with half the power for the same computation every 18 months. Extrapolate that out. It does scale pretty linear from past history, and looks to be continuing as well because Moore's Law is not in effect. And it's about 100 to 1 difference over the course of a decade. So what used to take you a minute at the 2000 period now should take you 1/100th of a minute at the end of that time, as long as you have the same computation power. Although for many instances you would say, why would I do that? I just need 1/100th of the computation power to do it. So with that kind of stuck in your head, the second one is data and social create new economies. So the reason I'm combining these two is one is a story about mobile technologies. I thought we were talking about cloud. And the other one's really a talk about how cloud becomes a lot more capable for fixed price if you had to buy your own servers through private cloud, or for rented price. So in our case, when you rent a mule from Microsoft on Azure, it's about 8 cents per hour. You would think in 18 months we should drop that to 4 cents an hour, but I don't control pricing. What I'm getting at is you'll see increasing efficiencies over time. If you think we're making low margin now, just wait. So the idea of turning this into something that releases new capabilities becomes very real when you're no longer bound by 2 things. One is where the network is, because as these devices get 4G deployed on them, latency decreases for the most part, throughput increases, and you can decide what process is local versus cloud versus both. So hopefully I've set up the social plus data center thing. And I'll let you guys skim this real quickly. But Wall Street Journal wrote a nice little article on the economies of stuff like Facebook. So if you look at everyone who's currently a customer of Facebook as an employee of Facebook, how do they generate revenue for Facebook? And that's through profiles, likes, posts, right? Those are the big units of work in the Facebook world. That's their infrastructure. Their services against that are all ad generated. So the idea here is all of us who use Facebook, and I will do a sweeping arm wave because I bet maybe at least half the room, 99%, use Facebook reasonably regularly, are contributing to Facebook out of the goodness of our hearts. Right? I mean, you can look at it from a very commercial point of view. With that in play, there's about 9.7 million. This is a little bit old, so it's probably around 12 million minutes a day of active information being added. And you kind of get the idea that you are part of the world's largest unpaid workforce. And I made a careful caveat at the end in respect to your employer and my employer. don't worry, our employer is already paying us, so Facebook doesn't have to because we're doing this at work. I won't make a comment on time slicing and greater efficiency and collaborative because it's really tough to make an argument like that when you're obviously on Facebook posting about concert tickets. But you guys kind of get the hour. Even at $7.25 an hour, it gets to be a pretty powerful thing when you start thinking about, okay, maybe that's not a direct value, but when you start thinking about where Facebook, because this was done just before they went public, as I recall, and post-public, there's some B's in the valuation aside, and some people made a nice little chunk of change just managing operations for their data center because they're involved in this value chain. So that's one thing I want to carve out is that's implicit in a lot of the funded companies that I interact with from the startup side. They'll be shortened to the eyeball business model. We'll just get eyeballs. Well, here's your eyeball more thoroughly discussed. This is where the money comes from. So this one is really depressing for those of us that have been in the IT business for a while. You kind of got to get over it if you haven't already. I expect most of us have come, the 5 stages of grieving. We're past anger, and we're more towards sad disappointment at this point. But you get the idea that 95% bring something from home. Why does anyone donate equipment for work? Because the work stuff sucks. That's the honest answer. The cool stuff is the stuff that you buy or that your company has since given up on. There's a big slice of companies inside the US that have decided, you know what, Rob, you're just kind of a jerk to the IT group. We're just going to give you $900 a year to buy whatever you want to support whatever you need, doing however it is that you do what you do. And don't come to us if your thing breaks. Hopefully you buy it under warranty. And we're not going to declare a standard on what you buy. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You bought the wrong thing. You should probably return it. So the idea of getting out of the business of defining what devices are is becoming more and more popular. Less popular in Europe, frankly. Difficult to implement in Central and South America just through infrastructure and network things being a little bit lagging. In Asia, very popular. There's 2.4 smartphones per person in Hong Kong today. Anyone know why? You have your iPhone. I'm a Microsoftie, but you have your iPhone because it's Hong Kong, and you do. And that's what you show people. Behind the scenes, you have your Crackberry, which is what your company bought you and you hate, but you can really jam out some emails on. And your third phone is because you don't have phone number portability in Hong Kong. So you have that phone with service just so it forwards all the phone calls from your friends to your iPhone or to your BlackBerry. That's it. And some people actually have a fourth phone, which is their phone in mainland China, because the phone numbers are quite different and it's quite expensive. So you'll note, if those of you that follow a lot of the phones out of China, they have dual SIM card slots. And you can have them both active at the same time. You can choose which phone number you answer through a UI on the screen. It's quite clever. So you can decide, am I answering the phone in mainland China or am I answering the phone in Hong Kong, which is currently cheapest? And we'll see a lot of that change over in our own application as we go as well, because I'm traveling with a tablet, I'm traveling with a PC, I've got my own smartphone, and pretty soon I'll have IP addresses for a lot of the smart equipment I use when I run as well. So how do I integrate all that stuff? So just want to carve out that just give up. That's always a great message. And this is true for me. It's probably true for a lot of people in the room, but these things have implications which are pretty powerful. BI today is seen as something that you kind of cross your fingers and hit the go button on. In a couple hours you come back and hopefully that cube is built, and the person who's really smart on playing with the cube and knows how to do reports on that stuff, or is a Excel ninja, can hook you up. It's going to change into something really is more what we think about, kind of like website analytics today. I've got my core things that I care about. My business analytic engine has figured out the core 4 things that I care about for me based on job type, role, and preference that I've established through my own internal blogging system, whether it's Chatter or something else. And then that's how I run my day. Which customers am I going to visit today? What are the 3 things which are overdue from me? And which expense reports require me to actually send in the physical receipts? All that stuff is coming. It's really BI functionality. We'll call it something clever sooner, I'm betting. But we're spending a lot of time at Microsoft on how to get out of writing Excel reports and getting to reports that are written on your behalf in a little bit different way than before. And this is the case where your IT doesn't own you anymore and you can shop to someone else to get your IT. So before we mentioned the idea of finding the cloud as an exercise in pulling T&E reports, it kind of is true. At some level, everyone's got a credit card at the admin level, or a group manager has enough authority to drop $5,000 a month on incidentals for their business unit. You see a lot of rules like that. Our total cloud cost internal at Microsoft for one of our major IT groups was about $120 about a year ago, and we were running 4 big line of business apps and about 50 associated apps around it. So the price point is 2 decimal place move, which makes it something that I could decide I didn't want IT to even run for me. I could run it for myself. So you see a lot of democratization on behavior. And that's a nice big number. So if you're in the SI business or you have companies that really self-describe as service providers today, software as a service has service in it. Customers will ask you to do services for them. My app does aggregation of internal discussions off SharePoints into dashboards for executive understanding of employee sentiment. I'm an HR person. Well, why in the world wouldn't that be something that's automated and presented to me automatically through my software as a service provider? But that means someone's got to be able to know what systems I have and how to integrate them. Once the IT person gives them the URLs for those 4 sites, they're out of the game, and now I'm just dealing directly with that vendor going forward. I already do that when I analyze sentiment for cloud worldwide basis today. $5,000 a month, there's 3 providers in the world that'll do it for me pretty easily, we have contract with, and they'll go pull sentiment from all these things, directly feed it into my core reporting system, and I have a dashboard. Who hates us and who loves us and why, and what are the discussions around, and where do those people go as watering holes to be able to understand how to change behavior. Those are the things in my world that are already occurring, and I'm sure you guys have your own examples as well. But one of the things that IT just needs to get accustomed around is the idea that not only do they not control the devices, they don't get to control what they're used for, and they may not be aware at all of even shadow IT being in play. This is no longer shadow IT. This now becomes the new IT. Ooh, slow build. This is the promised job slide, so let me just build it out. The key value statement on here I just want to drive across, which is startling to some people, especially if they're engineers, is it's better to be approximately correct than absolutely correct. It's more valuable to the business. It's more interesting to people to understand the what-if conversation, which means you're doing analytics at core. You're doing analysis on where trends are going. You're creating your own trends and seeing what the impact would be for your own product line or customer ecosystem. You're understanding buying behavior based on changes to both pricing, brand value, et cetera. So one of the things that we did, this is a silly example, but it's a powerful one, is we took a look at doing something as simple as changing the subscribe now button on the Azure landing page. It was a blue button because Microsoft Blue companies say, hey, you know what, we're geniuses, we'll make the subscribe button blue. Well, why don't we try making the subscribe button green? What will be the behavior change? So this is an example of the old way of doing analytics. What we found was changing it to the right shade of green, because we did multiple permutations, actually changed subscription behavior about 15%. Uptick. People like green buttons. Who knew? But how can I then say, okay, I understand for this kind of product, this kind of placement, this kind of adoption curve, what should my site guidelines be? How should I think about customer buy behavior? And how can I encourage better uptick or cross-sell in these things? It's going to get to be in all the discussion around my full understanding of what this customer does and how they do it, even if I don't know the customer's name. So how many people have actually gone to the trouble of finding the checkbox that says, do not follow me on their web browser? A few. So for everyone else, congratulations, they can really serve you well. And for everyone that did check the button, congratulations, they will really still serve you well because almost no one's honoring the button. But the idea here is when you come through the breadcrumb trail of 15 different websites and land on an actual decision that results in money changing hands or an impression being made or something of value from a search engine or an advertiser point of view, those things have history against them that are just being stored everywhere. And I'll talk a little bit about data having mass later, but not only are this part of the adjustments for the software systems and agents, it's absolutely huge for how we think about what the next phase is going to be. Did I move forward too fast? I think maybe I did. I'll leave this alone. But the basic idea here is software agents will act on your behalf rather than you creating things on your own. So we already have personas online. I'm sure Google's modeled out what you are as a user to Google. We certainly model out what a particular user type is to us, like how much money we make, what kinds of things do they buy, How can we appeal to them better, to serve them better, to give them things just in time without annoying them? How many flash ads can we serve them before they turn off their machine? All those sorts of things that are important in the internet. This will actually be somewhere where a lot of really smart people are doing a lot of dark science and not talking a lot about it because there's a lot of money to be made in figuring out how to do a lot of the agent technologies. We're up to number 6. We're almost there, folks. This is one of those claim versus do. 69% of the people say they hit non-related websites. Only 44% of the employers have a clue. Everyone else is probably recognizing the fact that, yeah, they just do whatever they want. Some people in my family are working for banks. The bank blocks Facebook, they block Twitter, all this stuff, because it's a bank, right? You don't want people in banking business cutting and pasting from one screen to the next screen. But it provides them Wi-Fi access for their 3G devices because employees demanded it. And you're like, well, you have now the company network, which is wired only. They don't allow wireless for corporate traffic. They have a completely unrestricted open wireless network, which is the biggest surface area in the world. And I guarantee many people have a wireless adapter plugged into their PC because no one's allowed a notebook, it's a bank, and their physical network, and they're running a bridge. That way they can share their Facebook on their home screen. So at the end of the day, you just can't control, but what you can do is describe policy, and as system providers like Microsoft, like the Oracles of the world, SAPs of the world get smarter about this, they can offer automated systems capabilities which are proofed out from a software factory point of view, proofing that what you're doing is safe, and as long as it fulfills the requirements at the API level, you're good. That needs to come. It's not here yet. So this is one of the major friction points for cloud as well, is the data and the perimeter around the data. And let me go back. I like the physics comment here. Anyone have a reasonable idea about how far you can have a data center from a lot of customers and have those customers stay in your data center? Rule of thumb in the concrete pouring business is about 500 miles. More than 500 miles away from a big portion of your customer base, latency and speed of light become an issue. So earlier point about in the New York Stock Exchange, very real thing, microseconds matter. In the case of web things, avoiding satellites like the plague is important. It becomes difficult feeling great about the next generation web if you live in Australia and when you live in South Africa. Very mature marketplaces, a lot of very sophisticated buyers, technologies, software implemented over there, long way away from major data centers. Satellite links are involved in many of those cases. One of my first projects at Microsoft was deploying Active Directory for the US Air Force over ISDN. So they had about 7 million objects, and you had to deploy it to little trucks that are somewhere on a plane over ISDN links. The way we got it done is the same way that you guys would assume that we got it done. It's called UPS. We mailed the hard drives, already synced. They plugged them in. They did a very small sync, and you're up and running. Unfortunately, inside of the world of where physics lives, data has mass. And a great example of this is, let's assume for the moment that we pull about a petabyte worth of user information through search engines and other ingress engines at Microsoft for analytics purposes, right? Let's assume for a moment that Microsoft wasn't Microsoft and we didn't have our own platform as a service and a lot of our buildings weren't really close to our own data centers. How do you copy a petabyte a month to a cloud provider so they can do analytics on your stuff? Because you're going to do an extract for some of the PI stuff, you're going to do an extract for some of the transaction stuff, and you're only going to send the 0.95 petabytes worth of information to do analytics on and decision support against. There's no way you can copy the data and have it done by the end of the month. It just doesn't pay to have a network pipe that big. So where I'm going with this is, if you're going to be doing analytics and you already have a solution that's cloud-based today, you probably need to have your analytics in the cloud. The data needs to live where the compute is. Having them separated becomes very, very difficult over time. It's one of the only things which is extremely difficult to undo when you go to the cloud. Once you have a large aggregation of data, imagine a world where you have some of your cloud on premises, you have a hybrid cloud environment, like some of your transaction processing stuff occurs inside of your own wire. Part of it's on the cloud, and you need to meld those things together for reporting. That's one of the most important decisions you need to make, is how you do that. Unwinding it turns into be a very unprofitable and very sad-faced exercise when you're 18 months down the road and you've got 50, 60 petabytes worth of information you need to munge through. It's nearly impossible to move the data because there's no platform as a service or infrastructure as a service provider which is going to mail you your hard drives so you can just inflate them back. You're going to be doing it over your T1 line from your Santa Clara office. Good luck with that. So here's our 7 kind of rules of sadness, I'll call it. These are kind of friction points, and these are also considerations in which, to the language of a startup, means opportunity, right? So when you look at the economics and the governments, especially on point 7, which I skipped over really quickly because it's such a difficult conversation, you'll find that it's an area where there's very little art today, there's very little science today, which means there's tons of room for smart people to solve. A lot of these things on number 7 move slowly. 1 through 6 are things that you guys can probably direct affect or already directly affecting today in the companies that you work with or the portfolios that you manage. The one thing I would call out is IT doesn't go away. IT gets a name change, just like software plus services got a name change, just like web services got a name change, just like Java is probably going to get a name change. The whole idea of doing entity-based operations becomes the new thing, but the considerations here I think are durable. And in the interest of leaving you with something to think about, I call it crystal ball time. These have absolutely no significance from the company point of view. They're based on my own digging through quite a bit of data and talking with a lot of customers about what I think is true and what they told me was true, which is more interesting. But that's something we'll see more and more. So the good news is, for number 1, everyone's probably going to nod their head like, yep, that's probably going to happen and it's difficult to unwind. We're well ahead in the United States versus other countries, and a lot of the split between what is your life and what is not your life. But you're going to see more and more of what is important in the consumer world to become accepted inside of the business world. Everyone here familiar with the term time slice or work slicing? I'm sure we're all doing, half the room might be pulling up an email as we speak. No offense, I'm doing an email myself right now, but the idea here is you can do multiple things at once poorly, and that's more effective for your business, right? So that's why we do it. That was a joke, hopefully. But hybrid clouds, I think, are probably the most significant trend that we'll see further refinement coming against. And when I say hybrid clouds, I don't just mean, is it on my private cloud with burst support from my public cloud? I include service providers in this. So if I can't manage my rented servers for my branch office in Santa Clara, if my headquarters is in Chicago, and guarantee operationally those things are exactly the same as my private cloud and my public cloud topology, I'm not doing it right. Because then I have to change operations based on locality, and that breaks one of the fundamental tenets of the cloud. I don't care where it runs and what it's running on. I care very much what runs and how my customers interact with it. It's the same discussion around availability. I don't necessarily care if the individual instance of the server goes down. I care very much if the service goes down. Here, I'm abstracting away even from the app itself being up on a virtual machine into being more around how the app is managed, similarly, whether it's running on platform as a service or infrastructure service, because more and more you'll see cloud providers and ISVs offer both a cloud version of their product and a traditional on-premise version of their product that will stitch together. You are going to be responsible for running both, or they're going to be responsible for running both. You need to be able to run it both at an ISP, like a GoDaddy, a one-on-one, et cetera, as well as your own servers, as well as Microsoft, and maybe including someone else's servers into the mix. So the idea of interop becomes pretty important. Number 5, I just want to hit really quickly. I highlighted end consumers. How many of you guys have found the export button in Facebook for your photos? That ain't one. How do you get your photos out of Facebook? Someone wrote a clever app to do it. Is it ever going to support your native image size? Nope. What happens if I lose my hard drive at home which has the original images? Well, at some point I'm going to install that app and download them again from Facebook. That's the reality of the world. How do I get to the point of being able to offer that service to service? That's something that there's going to be a lot of core drivers for a lot of people in the industry not to support. I want people to feel my application platform is sticky. Bad behavior is making sure my file format or my runtime is sticky because you can't get out of it. Good behavior is to make sure it's sticky just because it's so good. It's a good price point. It does all the right stuff. I'm constantly innovating against it. They get me. They manage the SLA pretty carefully. They blow me away every time I have a support request. They just do awesome at it. That you can think of as the noble curve. The ignoble curve typically is the early adoption curve. A lot of people will behave badly in the cloud, and I'll call it badly in the sense that I want something and I can't have it, therefore it's bad, that I can't export from Facebook, even though Facebook isn't charging me to host all my photos. Their value prop would be, well, we're running your stuff for free, what do you want from us? And I was like, well, you're making some money on the search side as well. So this stuff will aggregate over time as the industry becomes more mature, but I just want to carve out the fact that consumers have expectations on the cloud, not just enterprises. And as these consumers bring all these devices to work, who gets the support phone call when the download of all my Facebook photos fails? My IT guy does, because they have the switch that turns it off and on again on the network. And the last part to call out is we meant a little bit of a discussion around, on the first session of the day, around tooling and software development. We've already, in the latest release of some of our products, support the full dev environment being hosted on a public cloud. So if you want your software build to be done in an hour, you can do it on one machine. If you want it done in 10 minutes, run it on 6 machines. You want it in 1 minute, run it on 60 machines. And it's a scalable price point. So why isn't that something that we do more of? We agree, we should do more of that. But as that creeps into the full dev experience, including the licensing and the downloading experience, that's a good thing. How many people in the room are brave enough to run Office 2013? Just to pick a big product. A lot of shy people. I am brave enough to run it because I work for the company. But it took me 6 minutes to install. It actually streams in the background from my IT infrastructure, and I installed it remotely. So my window comes up with Word stuff in it, but if I click the pull down for fonts, maybe 3 fonts will be there, and then 4 or 5. You know, it streams in the background, which is kind of slick. The idea of installing things changes pretty substantially. Anybody that has a tablet, installs an app, knows that they're not going to be okay with having to reboot after install things. So even Microsoft is getting there with big products like Office. We'll see a lot of that accelerate as people decide that they want the run times themselves to be portable across clouds. So there's my crystal ball. And I think I tried to get us a little bit closer to time, but I know we have some exciting discussion time coming. So I will be outside if there's any questions. Oh, and the last point, sorry. I always have 7 things. It doesn't matter what your 3-letter acronym or 2-letter acronym is. It's going to change. So don't worry about necessarily being an ISV versus a CSV. The one thing I will say, for a lot of companies that are seeking to reinvent versus move forward, anyone know the odds of having a successful second restaurant in Manhattan versus having a successful first restaurant in Manhattan? It's the same. So if you did an awesome job, but you were lucky on your first company that you built $50 million business off of, you better go find some luck again. And you better be smart about it. You better bring some customers forward, because starting a new franchise, as you guys know, as startup companies, hard. So there's my pitch. Thank you, guys.
Great.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much, Rob. Okay.